Welcome to the Breaking 90 podcast, where we talk about all things sustainable fat loss. We take people on 90-day journeys to creating fat loss forever. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy the episode.
Hello and welcome back to the Breaking 90 podcast. I am your host, Kelly Sarlo, here with my amazing co-host, Jerrika Rydell. We are two of the coaches of Breaking 90 Fitness, and we're happy you're here. Jer, how are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
Oh, I'm good, thank you. As you know, I'm back in the gym training for another race, which I'm super excited about. And I'm training with a good friend of mine, and I've been debriefing about the race that we just did with her and a couple other people. And as you know, I'm studying personality in my own coaching practice, and watching these two things play out is fascinating. Like the different approaches that people have to how they like to move their bodies or how they are resistant to move their bodies, it's fascinating to me. Where some people
like you're seeing a connection between the personality type and their weight. Okay.
Yeah, so there are certain personality types that have like a tendency toward intensity, wanting to like push their limits at all times, and that's across the board, right? So that's like getting the most out of life, the most out of pleasure, food,
right?
Like physical.
I can think of a few friends. Yes.
Wow, just like they don't want to go to the gym unless they're going to sweat like crazy and like really feel like they've pushed their limits, versus me, where it's just like, is my form correct? Did I do it properly? It's like slow things down, don't get too intense, do it really well, versus other personalities who are just like, really need to feel like they're personally expressing themselves. And if this is boring and not feeling authentic to them, they want to change it up. It's just, and of course, we're all accountability partners. And it's like, this is a mishmash of wild.
Are you all a different, like, are you each one of them that you just described?
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. So,
oh boy.
And figuring out that compromise too, right? Because you've got a relationship to salvage at the end of the day, even though you're training together.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can definitely, hopefully with the big lifts, we take the Kelly personality and we focus on form. And then maybe with the end part or some of the cardio, you go with the intense friend and you push it. Right. And then who cares if every other week or every other couple workouts you want to change it up because the friend needs some variety. So I think you guys got this.
There's a coach. I didn't even know that you were going to problem solve this for me today.
I just rolled with it. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Sorry.
No, it's great. It actually rolls right into the topic that I wanted to ask you about today, which is it's Preventative Health Awareness Week. So I wanted to talk to you as a nutrition and movement coach with so much experience in the field, like tips and tricks. And maybe that sounds cheap. Maybe I want to reword that. Like, how would you advise people to be in a form of preventative health? And here's how I'd like to break it down, but you can take it in any direction that you want. I'm thinking like heart, brain, and body, right? Because we want to deal with the whole person. So if you can speak to, preventative health for us.
Okay, this is going to be tough without some prep, but we'll roll with it.
I think you're going to be
okay. Okay. All right, you guide me and we'll see what happens.
Sure. So let's start with heart first. Like preventative health for good, healthy hearts. What should we be looking at, even if we're talking bare ass minimums for the average person, or if you want to break it down into specific, people or ages, whatever you think is most responsible, I think.
Okay, so I'm not going to get too specific just because I don't have the literature in front of me and I don't want to misquote, if that's the right word, some things that are out there and that people that live by, or that's their guides that they use. So I just don't want to use the wrong numbers, but I will talk a little bit more broadly. So when we think heart, there's always been this idea that cardio, get the heart pumping, cardio. Whereas in the last, let's say 5, 10, 15 years, maybe not even that long, the idea of strength training and the benefits it has on the heart has really come to light. And this has been across the board, regardless of what age you are. We have here in Sudbury, my gym is running a master's class where we have adults 65, 75, 85, and there's lifting. That is their workout. There's like a strength training component. And I just want to, and I don't want to cut the cardio component down because I want to touch on that as well of the benefits, but not just focusing on pumping the heart at a high intensity, whether that's expecting to run or doing your 30-minute elliptical or doing your 30-minute walk a day. Yes, amazing, not just for the heart. There's so many other components, and I'll bring them back up, I'm sure, when we touch on other parts. But cardio, huge component, does not have to be the end all be all. And in fact, I don't think it should be the end all be all. So when we're talking strength training for the heart specifically, there's a lot of other benefits, and we can touch on for the other components of preventative health. But when we're thinking heart, when you strength train, you can actually strength train. Your heart is a muscle. You can actually thicken the walls and strengthen the walls of that heart via strength training, which is pretty amazing. And it doesn't require us to do a million reps of something. It can just be a slow, controlled, kind of like the Kelly personality approach, right? And and feel the muscles squeeze, activate, and not have too high of a heart rate afterwards. That's not what I'm searching for necessarily when I'm doing the strength training, but it's still benefiting the heart. So I just really wanted to lead by that, because it's a really important reminder, no matter what age you are. And we can change the weights and the intensity depending on your age, of course, but everyone, I truly believe that everyone should be doing some form of strength training for heart benefits.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So nutritionally, what should I be focusing on crowding in for my heart?
Awesome. So for the longest time, I think that this is kind of another, I think I'm throwing in some misconceptions, but that's good. We'll kind of debunk some stuff. Everyone's thinking fruits, veggies, fibers, right? Focusing on all your colorful rainbow when we think heart health. But what's important to note is we'll talk about protein. And I think this is one that often in the past would get tied in with these myths about the liver. Eating too much protein can affect your liver, and there was no real benefits on heart health, when in fact we're noticing having adequate amounts of protein, not only, and again, I'm talking about protein in the sense of a muscle as well, because our heart is a muscle, but protein not only affects your skeletal muscle, the muscles you use for strength training, or the muscles you use to walk or to run or just sit down and stand up, but it's also benefiting the heart in terms of longevity. So I wish that I had the statistic off the top of my head, because there's one stat I want to throw out at you guys, but maybe I'll say that for another podcast. But yes, skeletal heart, or protein for the skeletal muscles, but as well as the heart muscle, would be something I would focus on. So adequate amounts. Again, I don't want to give these main numbers, but the old nutritional pyramid, the Canadian Food Guide pyramid, used to say, or maybe it still says, I think like 0.4 to 0.7 or something grams per pound of body weight. But now the upwards is saying like 0.7 to 1 gram per pound of body weight. So we don't really use the old guides. Again, I call them old, but they're still out there. We're really trying to up the amounts of protein in our diet, and as well healthy fats. There's different types of fat, of course, but I think fat in itself, when people think the word fat, they're thinking, bacon grease, they're thinking McDonald's, they're thinking canola oils and all that kind of stuff. But we want to think more of the healthy fats, the avocados, coconut oils, if you're cooking using avocado oil, things in that nature. So really changing the direction of fats, but those are so amazing for our heart health as well.
Okay, that's great. Do you mind if I do brain?
Yeah, I love that. Okay. I'm interested. This is more your kind of wheelhouse.
Yeah, in terms of preventative health, right? Just taking care of the brain long term. We can talk a lot about those healthy fats that you just mentioned that are going to make sure that the brain is staying myelinated, right? So meaning that the sheath over top of your transmitters transmitting signals is actually allowing it to keep the speed that it needs to, and connections that it needs to. I'm dumbing this down, of course. So we want to make sure that those healthy fats are contributing to brain health. The other thing too is brain mapping. So a lot of us as creatures of habits want to do the same thing day in and day out, whether that's your workouts, whether that's what you eat, the routine that you use for work, for play, etc. When we get into ruts of the same thing, we're not challenging the brain's capacity to take in new information, new stimuli, and adapt to it, right? The brain constantly wants to map things out. So even the way that you drive to work, if you change that up by just going down a different street, you are helping the brain continue to create new maps, which keeps it at the top of its game, right? So in preventing things like Alzheimer's, which I understand there are genetic components to a lot of things that do attack the brain at certain points, but you can prevent the early onset of some of these things in some ways by making sure that you are challenging the brain, especially with things like language, right? Doing brain puzzles, whether they are mazes, word puzzles, word searches, Sudokus, things like that, that are going to, again, challenge the brain in different ways. So this all functions together for preventative health.
For excuse me, for preventative health for the brain, I immediately, of course, as a movement coach, go to exercise. Right, the data out there that supports moving your body for your brain health. Not only, some people will be thinking like, okay, if I exercise mentally, my mental health for my brain, and they're thinking maybe that relation, and that's awesome, and I feel so much better. But like you mentioned, the actual connections that are happening and the firing in your brain when you exercise is pretty amazing. So that's another, and again, it doesn't have to be, I'm not talking any form of specific. I'm just saying exercise, like get out and move your body. Step one.
Yeah, I remember we've had her on the show, I think, at some point, or she's done some classes for us, but my yoga instructor, Amanda Cooley, when I first started seeing her, probably over a decade ago, she would say, you know, we're going to rotate the arm in this direction, but I want you to rotate it not from the arm itself or the wrist. I want you to rotate it from the shoulder, just as an example. And there was no connection being made from my brain to those particular muscles. And so she'd ask me to do this movement, and I was like, I can't find this signal. Like, I can't,
Wow.
what do I do? And it took months, and I mean like multiple months, where finally she cued the same thing. And I was like, oh my God, there's a connection. How, it's like, how have I never known what that was supposed to feel like, right? So even connecting your brain to particular muscles and smaller subsets in the body is not something we necessarily think that we're not doing, if that makes sense. That was a lot of double negatives. Creating those mind body connections
Yes.
is so important, because that's your kinesthetic awareness, right? So as we age, again, we're talking preventative health, we want to have those connections so that we notice when things go numb. We want to notice when things, you know, are not functioning at a 10 out of 10 anymore, and we start to go, this is kind of an 8. I think I need to keep an eye on this, right?
Yep.
So that we're not needing drastic changes to catch our attention, to then get help.
Awesome. Yeah, I honestly, when I think of brain and exercise, like you mentioned, you're literally creating new motor patterns every time you, well, not every time, but until you do it enough times for a new exercise, for a new combination of exercises, right? Think about if you're in a functional fitness class and the coach is like, do a burpee broad jump, then do this, then do that. Like there's like all these words being thrown at you, and you have to literally practice until you create a new motor pattern. Well, that's coming from your brain, and think about the benefits that has by creating multiple new ones constantly over time.
Yeah, that's really cool. Like those combinations or choreography that essentially you have to get used to.
Exactly.
Dance is actually a huge preventative healthcare measure for your brain. So things like Zumba or any kind of dance class for that matter. And I've also seen two occupational therapists who are, or recreational therapists as well, who are in specifically like retirement homes, who are creating really great activities for senior citizens to keep up their coordination.
Yes, I've seen these. It's amazing.
It's so
There's some
engaging.
pretty awesome videos on social media for anyone who's like, what are they talking about? Yeah, like they have them using I'm trying to think of like wrapping paper as like a kind of like a sword, but then they're poking a balloon and they're getting in this hula hoop. Like they're doing things that maybe you think a child would do, but what it's doing for their brains, it's so awesome to watch these videos and to see them figure it out.
Yeah.
Love it.
Okay, so take us away kind of from the neck down. Let's get back into the body for preventative healthcare.
Awesome. So, I mean, we can take this a couple different directions. And if we're looking neck down, I guess I'm thinking more from a broad standpoint in terms of mobility and flexibility. And incorporating some type of a stretching protocol or whatever yoga routine, anything that you enjoy doing or would enjoy doing, that's something I would highly recommend for preventative health. Whether that's we want to prevent joint dysfunctions, we want to prevent muscle tears or cramping. I mean, we can kind of target every aspect of the body, postural issues that we're afraid of down the line, like the hyperkyphosis. If you have a grandmother who's hunched over walking, right, and you're like, I want to prevent that over time. All those things tie back to flexibility or mobility, depending on what type of routine. And when I say those two terms, and I've talked about this in previous podcasts, but just whether you're working on flexibility, like actually lengthening the muscle over a long period of time, holding it so that you can reach further or touch your toes, for example, or mobility where we're working through full ranges of motion. So you might not be holding something in a static stretch for a period of time, but you're able to, at 80, you're still able to squat down and pick something up off the floor, which, if again, thinking of videos, if you've seen some of these incredible elderly people still prioritizing their mobility and making sure they can still hold that deep squat or step up onto something, it's pretty impressive to ask them what they've done. And usually it's some type of routine, whether it's a stretching routine, a yoga routine, things in that nature.
Very cool. I love that.
Awesome. And then for the body, I mean, you want me to go through movement and nutrition again, or how do you want me to?
Yeah, nutrition. Great too.
Awesome. Yeah. So just obviously, I'm not going to dive into it again because I touched at the beginning, but any form of exercise we kind of touch on for the heart, we touched on for the brain, the benefits for the body as well. I mean, whether you're doing it aesthetically or for functional lifestyle, like it doesn't matter what your reason is, it's always going to still give you the benefits for preventative health. So just getting your body moving in some way, shape, or form. Ideally, again, incorporating strength training as we age. That's really important because our bone density. So there's these little web spaces between your bone called trabeculae, and as we age, that gets reduced. But if we're strength training, we can actually strengthen the trabeculae in your bone and create a tougher, a stronger web space to prevent, which usually happens, right, falls as we age. And that's one of the leading causes of injury, death, hospitalizations in elderly is actually a fall. So if we can do things like strength train and strengthen our bones, not only that, strengthen our tendons, our ligaments, our muscles, we're likely to prevent those not so ideal situations as we approach the elderly age kind of range. So that's just, again, one benefit of incorporating strength training and exercise as we age. I can do a whole podcast on just those benefits of strength training. So we're just going to leave it at that for this part. Nutrition for the body. I think this is basically what we preach at Breaking 90, all of our nutritional components. And I think one of the biggest ones is sustainability. Now, whether you're dieting, in quotations, dieting, looking for fat loss, or whether you're looking for maintenance just to live a healthy life, the word sustainability should be kind of at the forefront of your brain. And it's that question of, can I keep doing this for years to come? Can I keep eating these foods? Can I maintain these habits? Am I feeling restricted? Asking yourself all these questions, because if we're restricting too much at this point in our life, that will have, right? That could have an effect on our muscles, our bones, our ligaments, our joints, if we're doing it for too long and too quickly. So if we're approaching anything in life with that kind of sustainability term, we're likely going to see a longer, healthier life in the long run.
Love it. That's excellent.
Awesome. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say thank you, but did I cut you off?
Yeah, no, and I don't really know if we need to go into all the specifics of nutrition, just because we do know. I could go over protein again. I can go over incorporating, all the macronutrients, your proteins, your carbs, and your fats, and why. But I think those that are listening have listened probably, hopefully, to enough of our podcasts to know why we preach the whole health kind of approach and why we fill our plates with all the goodness and we don't restrict food groups. So I want to take it a little bit more in that generalized approach. with kind of our principles at Breaking 90.
Yeah, I love that.
Is there anything you want to add for that component?
No, I think you did a great job. And I mean, we've gone
In general.
Pardon?
So yeah, I just wanted to keep it general.
It's good. It's something that everyone can relate to. And hopefully too, while people were listening to this, you are thinking about yourself, going through the checklist of, what we've talked about and asking, like, am I doing something to contribute to those forms of preventative health? This is about you, right? So can I go into a tip then?
Can I add something?
Always go.
I think when I think of preventative health, I think it's worth mentioning, and this doesn't really necessarily fall maybe under the headings, but for preventative health, it's worth noting that we need to, in order to prevent diseases, injuries, things later in life as we age, it's worth making sure that we're checking in it with our health, whether that's a healthcare provider, or maybe we're doing our blood pressure checks, or maybe we're doing regular strength tests to make sure that we're not seeing a big decline. We're doing some form of assessment. And a lot of you do see a doctor regularly, and you are getting, your cholesterol and your blood sugars and everything checked out. But this is the reminder if you haven't, right? So just do a general check-in with your health, do the general assessment, and don't forget about the body in terms of, okay, last year I was able to touch the floor. This year I'm only touching my ankles. Last year I can squat down to 90 degrees. This year I'm only squatting to 45. Like, those are still parts of an assessment that, we forget often when we're so used to just doing blood pressure checks and cholesterol checks and things in that nature. But our body has another really big component. Same with our brain, right? Last year I was able to complete Sudokus no problem. This year I'm finding them really confusing. Well, these are all assessments and check-ins to be like, okay, maybe I do need to get this looked at further. That's preventative health, right? Checking in with ourselves and realizing things are changing. Let's prevent it from happening long term.
That's beautiful. Assessments didn't even cross my mind, so I'm really glad that you brought that up.
Cool. Awesome. A little wrap take home.
Yeah, it was great. So my tip actually would be to get curious about your family history. This is something that I want people to start thinking about, right? If you haven't already, dig into your family history, talk to the people that you're in contact with in your family and your extended family, to ask, what is running in our genetics? What have we been through as a family? And hopefully that is something where you can take the information and start to ask yourself, okay, if this is passed on to me, what does that mean for my future? What does that allow me access to? What does that restrict me access to? What will that add to my life? What is that potentially going to mean in terms of loss, whether that's agency, autonomy, independence, however you want to word this, or even just access to activities that I love to do. So getting curious about your health history, knowing how that's going to potentially affect you, that's going to be helpful to understand where to start, right? Because preventative health awareness is a very broad concept. So make it personal, figure out what it actually means to you. And that's where you're going to know where to begin in your own journey of health.
Cool. That's awesome. I love that.
Cool.
Thanks for that reminder. It's a reminder for everyone. It's good. We needed that.
Okay, so thank you to everyone who is joining us today and has been a follower of the Breaking 90 podcast. Please make sure that you hit the subscription button. You can also ring the bell for notifications so that you don't miss every new episode on Tuesday mornings. If you can share, or review our podcast, that helps us reach a broader audience, and we deeply appreciate that. Otherwise, we'll see you next week for a brand new episode.